Hey there, everybody. Welcome to our review for the Fall of the House of Usher, episode 1, and also 13 Edgar Allan Poe Easter eggs you may have missed from this absolute fire premiere. Like, an awesome, incredible start.
This is such a good premiere. I'm so excited. We're in spooky season now,
Yes.
and all the fun spooky shows and limited series like this are out now. And, it's been so fun to jump into this. Like, I'm not, an expert at Edgar Allan Poe. I know a little bit here or there, but it just doesn't actually matter for those of you like me
Mhm.
who don't really know a lot about him or his writing. This show is just so good.
Full disclosure here for me, I studied a lot of Edgar Allan Poe in college. I took courses about his poetry. I'm a
Mhm.
really big fan of just writing in general from this period, things that are very dark and gothic. So, this is a really great episode to just sort of look at with a fine tooth comb. There is so much Poe related content in here. You can tell that they really created this entire show as sort of a love letter to his work, his style, his aesthetic.
Mhm.
And the more you sort of figure out how they've done that, the more interesting this show becomes.
But before we get into 13 Edgar Allan Poe Easter eggs that you may have missed along with our review,
Yeah.
make sure you hit that subscribe button. We're going to be covering every episode of this show, and you don't want to miss any of it. It's a great way to support the channel. It really helps us
Yes.
to be able to continue to make videos like this. So hit that subscribe button.
Okay. We're just going to go from the jump here.
Yep.
Number one, titles. I'm a big fan of episode titles, but for the Fall of the House of Usher in particular, they are clearly going in a clear Edgar Allan Poe direction.
Mhm.
This title is A Midnight Dreary, which is actually in the very opening part of The Raven, which I feel like most people would consider this to be his most well-known poem. It's the one that's most famous, gets referenced the most, Nevermore. I will say for me personally, The Telltale Heart is my favorite work of Edgar Allan Poe, and I hope we get a little bit more into that later this season.
Okay, number 2, Verna, the woman that is haunting Roderick throughout this, is an anagram of Raven.
Yeah.
And we first saw her on the show here back at this New Year's Eve party in 1979, where we see Roderick and his sister, and they're at this bar. And it seems like they may have done something nefarious. And they meet this bartender, Verna, and she's there sort of, chatting them up, having some drinks with them. But there is this sort of quick flash of her at a table with them where it's seeming like she's giving kind of, I don't know if she's a witch or like
Mhm.
a psychic or like what is going on with her, but she is really in Roderick's head in the present.
And dark prophecies, imagery, curses, like these are things that are very prominent through a lot of Poe's literature,
Mhm.
and they wove Verna into this episode in a lot of really fun, interesting ways. Like you
Mhm.
get a little shot of her very, very early on. You have the mask of the Raven at one point, which
Mhm.
really cool mask. They've created that. That's very gothic, very scary. Obviously, we get the just straight up shot of the Raven or Verna, if you want to consider them one of the same.
Mhm.
I love that ending shot of the Raven. Like, I'll just say that it was so simple but so cool.
Yeah, it really was.
So, Roderick and Madeline, they're clearly haunted or doomed or something else by Verna, or at least that's what the show is making us believe.
Yeah, so the basic premise of the show is that we have this brother and sister, Roderick and Madeline, who at a very young age, their mother got really, really sick. And because of her religious beliefs, she did not want to see a doctor. It was
Yeah,
whatever was going to happen to her was going to happen to her. And it was seemingly that the man down the street, Mr. Longfellow, was
yeah.
their father, that there was some sort of an affair or something that had happened. She worked for him for a really long time, but she was always like, don't go to his house, don't go over his fence, don't knock on his door, don't be around him, because she knew that he was the father and she was trying to keep it separate because he was not the greatest guy. He's also married. I'm
Yeah.
sure there was a lot of other are complications, but eventually their mother passes away. They don't really know what to do. They go to Mr. Longfellow. He's just like, nah, get out of here. I don't care what you're implying. It's all just nonsense. They decide to bury their mother. And lo and behold, what happens? All of a sudden, the casket's broken open out of the dirt. She's in the house. She walks down the street and she just murders him. And then she dies.
Okay. All of this
Crazy.
all of this craziness, the idea of even quote unquote buried alive, like
Yep.
all of this has roots in the actual story, The Fall of the House of Usher. And this brings us into number 3 here, that Roderick and Madeline, these are characters that are taken directly from that story. And, you know, clearly in between the time period, the setting, the number, and there's a lot of characters on this show, like a
Yes.
lot.
Yeah.
Not everybody else is from this. And I don't think it's even fair to say that the entirety of the Netflix show is based directly on The Fall of the House of the Usher. But Roderick and Madeline are direct characters from that. And this show is really embodying this idea of secrets, decay, the inevitability of death. You even get sort of an allusion to that at the very end of this episode with what we hear from Roderick after he is on the pavement and there's blood and it's all going sideways.
Yeah. So in the present, we're here with, Roderick, who has now taken over the company from Mr. Longfellow. And he is now sort of, he's the everything, incredibly rich. And this is all sort of taking place in a 2-week period where all of his children have died. They're all adults, young adults, and they've all died within a 2-week period. And Augie has been looking into this whole thing, and he's been subpoenaed to court, everything. There's 73 charges that's been laid out against the company, against the family, and it seems like there was some sort of informant in the family. Now, is it one of the kids? Is it a spouse? Is it a friend? He also has a very young wife. Like, who is it, and what would the motivation be for them to actually inform on them? Because it seems like Augie actually was gonna catch them. Like that whole scene in court where he was basically like, we can't even get a parking ticket on this family. Like this family is just squeaks by every time, no problem, nothing ever sticks, but I got an informant, so let's see how you deal with that. I'm not going to reveal who it is because something will likely happen to them. So instead,
It is really funny how they reference The Departed in this episode. And there's clearly parallels with this show and The Departed. There's clearly parallels with this show and Succession.
I know, right? That whole opening sequence, I was like, is this a new Succession, but horror?
It is funny that, we have, slight Succession spoilers here. I mean, we do have a funeral scene fairly late in Succession's final season, and we begin The Fall of the House of Usher with a funeral, and we're in there in a church, and this brings us to Easter egg number 4, the line, and this is an incredible line, and the fever called living is conquered at last. This is a reference to For Annie is the title of this work, and it's really, really good. Most of Poe's stuff that we reference in here, with like a couple of exceptions, most of them are short. Most of them you can read in just, half an hour, something like that. And once again, it's the idea of death being brought forward. But the thing that you mentioned that it makes this funeral all the more depressing is the time we're getting to this. It's just like so much death piled on top of even more death. And, you could even say that Roderick just falling down at the end of this and him being ready, it's the inevitability of you've lost almost everything. You've lost almost everyone.
Okay, so talking quickly again about his mother.
Yes.
This is number 5, Eliza. Roderick's mother shares a name with Poe's mother, which, I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, these next couple ones are ones that I really, really like, because these are ones that just sort of show, okay, you know what? Creative team for Netflix, you guys have done a good job in sort of combing through Poe's life, finding some things that are even fun Easter eggs. 6 is my absolute favorite. I love this one so much because it is ridiculous. So, Mr. Longfellow, who Jess has already spoken a little bit about, this character is likely a reference to a famed poet named Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who is a poet who Edgar Allan Poe hated. Like, just straight up dislike. He felt like basically that Longfellow was a hack, that they were taking these poems and styles from other people and then just trying to emulate them. So it is really dark humor that this show then decides to make Longfellow this character who gets killed. I don't think that that is a coincidence. I think that
No.
it is something that if Edgar Allan Poe were alive and watching this show, he would probably get a laugh about it because that's the sort of sense of humor that he has.
Yeah, and we also saw Eliza like ringing the bell, which is a reference to the poem The Bells.
The Bells is a fun poem because at one point during the bells, it just is like bells, 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 the ringing of the bells. And if you go to a dramatic reading, by the way, of Edgar Allan Poe stuff, you can make it so over the top and just be the bells, the bells. That's why this is a perfect Halloween show. Okay, number 8. You mentioned say Dupin, aka Augie, earlier.
Yep.
He first appeared in The Murders in Rue Morgue, which is actually considered an inspiration for a lot of detective thrillers that sort of come after the fact, including to some degree a certain Sherlock Holmes. So who would have thought Sherlock comes from one of the just most dark and twisted writers of the past few centuries?
So in the show, in the present, after we see Roderick at the funeral, he collapses, he says it's time, and then he finally sends out a message to Augie and is like, it's time we're gonna meet up. Like, meet me at my childhood home, and we're gonna talk it all through, and I'm gonna give you my confession. Where they sit down. There's obviously some animosity towards them.
Yes.
I mean, each other. Augie is investigating him. Roderick's on the other side, being like 73 charges. Like, all my kids are dead. I have 6 children. They're all dead. Like, stop.
I think what makes it probably even more frustrating here for Augie is just he's facing somebody who's basically like, I'm going to give you all of the answers. And the answer is I'm responsible for everyone. And I don't think it's necessarily like super, super literal, but I think whatever he feels like he is cursed or haunted by this raven, Viverna, however that manifests on itself on the show, it's something that he felt like was inescapable, and this was all going to happen at one point, that his life was going to start to decay. But I think the question is, how can he as a character express this to Augie without Augie just thinking, okay, you were just completely crazy. I don't know what you were saying anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, they portrayed Augie as someone who's very smart. I mean, even with the story that Roderick tells him about, how he grew up, his sister, his mother, everything that happened with his mother, and then it's sort of like, oh, and she's standing right behind you right now, to have Augie kind of be like, listen, I know this tactic. You're trying to assume some sort of control in this conversation, that if I look, whether she's there or not there or whatever's behind me, it just doesn't matter, because if I look, then I'm giving you what you want and you're controlling this conversation. I'm not going to do that. So instead, I'm just going to drink your very expensive liquor and be like, let's get to it.
All right. Number 9, we're going to stay in the legal field here, and we're going to talk about Arthur Pym, aka Mark Hamill, who hopefully we just get a lot of Mark Hamill throughout this. How can you not want more of him? So he's Roderick's attorney on the show. Now, this is a reference to the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, which this is actually the only complete novel by Poe that is out there. And there's an additional, I guess you could call this 9B. It's like a fun fact within a fun fact. This is just like a nerd celebration for me at this point. But he was on board in this novel, a ship called the Grampus, which you also hear Roderick called on the show.
Yeah.
Okay, let's let's talk about Lenore.
Lenore.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as I said at the beginning of this video, I don't know a ton about Edgar Allan Poe, but I do know the name Lenore. And to actually have it be like Roderick's granddaughter, I thought
Yeah.
was just such a cool thing. I mean, we saw her at the funeral, and I mean, the whole place was empty. As we
Yeah.
said, all his children had died. We saw that Roderick's wife was there, and we saw that the granddaughter was there. Lenore was also there, sitting beside him. And she was also texting him a lot during this conversation that he was having with Augie. I mean, he doesn't know why or what's going on, but there was a lot of texting going back and forth. So Lenore is the love the narrator loses in The Raven, but
Yeah.
is also the subject of a separate poem.
Yeah. And given that Lenore is probably one of the most famous characters in all of Edgar Allan Poe, like, she's very fitting for number 10. And the
Yeah.
idea of having, like, this love that has been lost, or I think in the case of this show, an innocence that may be lost with Lenore, like, she seems to be one of the less deranged people that we have met so far.
Yeah. So after Roderick realizes that there's an informant that's either in the family, someone close by, a spouse, it could be anybody that's close by, he decides to call this huge family dinner. All spouses need to come as well. And as everybody we're getting introduced to everybody, just a little bit of time, the big cast.
Yeah.
Lenore's one of the people that's kind of like, well, if we've done something bad, like, shouldn't that come out? Like,
Yeah.
it is sort of that one innocent person in the family is just like, yeah, bad people should pay for bad things. Like, this is a no-brainer. Like, why are we even discussing this? Then we have this crazy dinner scene where basically we've got like this NDA that's given out, which is just kind of like, listen, everybody's going to sign this. And if you turn out to be the person that's the informant, you're going to forfeit your entire fortune to all of this. And then Roderick puts on top of it a bounty on the person to basically be like, if you bring this person in, $50 million tax free, it's all yours, no problems. I don't care who it is, you just bring them to me. So now they're all basically out to hunt each other. It is such a creepy theme.
Even if you just take Edgar Allan Poe out of this for a moment, this is still an awesome premise for a show. Like,
I know.
it's the idea of, it's not that big of a surprise that all of these people are dead if you were basically incentivizing them.
Yes, $50 million.
Go after each other. Try to figure it out. I mean, we even hear a couple of accusations that are thrown out even within this episode. I mean, I'll make a prediction or I'll negate somebody in a minute, but number 11 here, we got to talk a little bit about these children's names, because this is the one where I feel like they really had a little bit of a field day with this one. So you've got Napoleon, aka Leo, Tamerlane, Frederick, aka Freddy, Prospero, Victorine, and Camille. Hopefully I pronounce all of them correctly, but these are all names that are taken from other parts of Poe's greater works. They're not all from the same thing. They don't necessarily line up with the personality that we're seeing on the show, but these names that were chosen were all deliberate. And I find it kind of interesting too that some of the names that are sort of outside of Roderick's family, I had a much harder time finding and sort of connecting them to something that Poe did. It might be that I'm just not seeing it, or it might just be another crazy thing where it's like, if you're related to Roderick in some way, you get an Edgar Allan Poe name. And
That's
if you're
right.
not, you're just sort of thrown all the way over there. You just get to be normal. Congratulations.
That's right.
Okay, now let's rule. I'm gonna do something crazy here. Tinfoil hats on.
Oh, tinfoil hats on.
As we get to number 12 here, I'm going to rule out Prospero as being the informant here. Because Prospero is depicted in Poe's work, The Mask of the Red Death, as sort of being snobby, uncaring, cowardly. Like, he's basically somebody who tries to hide out in a mansion with all sorts of other rich people while there's some horrible stuff, to put it mildly, is just sort of spreading guess what? Spoiler alert, everybody in Poe stories tends to have a bad end. It doesn't go well for
Yeah,
Prospero.
and he's a young guy in this show where it seems like Roderick will give some sort of like a startup to all of his kids. He had said very clearly that because his father kept the gates closed on him, his gates are open to all of his children. He's like, I have 6 children, 5 mothers, gates are open to them. Anytime they need to come in, they're welcome in. And it seems like one of the things he likes to do is give them sort of like a start to life. What is it that you want to be doing? And I mean, we saw his son kind of be like, basically, I want to start a nightclub. And he was just like, no.
What's better, Prospero starting a nightclub or Conor Roy running for president?
Oh, that second one.
I'm really intrigued by all of these kids. Like, there's still a lot we have to get to know about them, but I think we can assume from what we saw, these aren't great people. I mean, Leo's just like got a woman hiding outside while like a guy is coming in.
Okay, so let's talk about that black cat named Pluto, which is a direct reference to the black cat.
What a perfect number 13 this is. Black cats, creepy. This is just the most obvious, like, okay, we're just gonna throw this in here for the fun of it, and people who are Edgar Allan Poe fans are just gonna be like, hey, look what you did.
I think overall they really set this up to be, I mean, just a very easy to follow series. They gave just enough mysteries. Like we saw Roderick's doctor show up right before they had this dinner. We don't know why he's there. He could be there to tell him bad news about himself, about someone else. Like, we don't know yet. There's still who's the informant. I love a whodunit like nobody's business. This is one of my favorite things to watch besides Revenge.
Yeah.
So it's really pulled me in with that as well. We don't know everybody that well yet, but the idea that this whole thing just takes place over 2 weeks. I mean, even Augie was just like, yeah, these deaths aren't all related. And I mean, Roderick really feels like they are. There's sort of this mysterious feeling around the whole thing with everything, that's going on with Verna and her popping up over and over again. And it's just, this is set up in such a way that there's going to be so much discussion on like, who's the informant? Why would they do that? Is it, they're going to get something out of it money-wise? I mean, they all seem like they're fairly well off, whether they're waiting for Roderick to pass away so everybody gets an inheritance or not. It seems like Roderick's been fairly generous with his money if the idea is, when you come of age and you have a good business idea, let's go.
I already have the tinfoil hat on here, so this is my proclamation. There are 2 or more informants. It's not just one person, because this family is full of terrible people. They probably have been ratting on each other for like the longest period of time.
I just feel like it's gotta be someone who's like a spouse, or maybe I don't know, somebody who's not really going to inherit the wealth. Like maybe the young wife, if she's not really put into the will the way that she thinks she should be. They brought up prenups a million different ways of like how thick they are. And, you're really going to be getting nothing kind of thing. And so it feels like because they brought up the prenup so many times and there are quite a few spouses there, that it might be a spouse that they're just like, I don't really have anything to lose because like I signed this prenup. So like nothing's happening for me.
And it is very interesting that when you look at how some of these people died, not all of them died alone. Like let's just put it that way. So there's potential for this to go a lot of different ways. We haven't watched ahead yet, but this was a really phenomenal start to the show. Like we said at the jump, I think it's a real gift for anybody who has followed Edgar Allan Poe and loved his work to sort of see it represented in this sort of way. I know it is kind of a mishmash of a lot of his different works thrown in there, but his works are so short. It's kind of hard to tell a multi-episode television show just based on one of them.
Absolutely. And if you don't know much about Edgar Allan Poe, like me, it's still such a great show. Like if you're just looking into sort of the murder mystery of it all, the informant of
Yeah.
it all, all the suspects, and it's just going to be a great unravel.
Well, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It does really help us here at the channel, and it also makes sure that you will not miss any of our other upcoming reviews on the Fall of the House, Fall of the House of Usher. So, thank you guys so much. Thank you to all of our patrons for your
Thank you.
support. We'll see you here next time.